Next topic we're going to be discussing is gross domestic product. And gross domestic product is the dollar value of all goods and services produced within a country's borders in a given year. We're going to break down that a little bit here. Dollar value, we're going to look at the cash value of the sale of all goods and services produced by households, firms, which are businesses, and government in a calendar year. We're only going to look at final goods. We're not going to look at intermediate goods, which means if we're building a house, as opposed to all the materials that go into it, we're just going to count the house. Produced within the United States borders, we call it gross domestic, which means at home. So if something is made, if a car is produced in Ohio by a Japanese auto company, we would count it because it's made here. If it's a United States car company producing it in Brazil, we would not count that. And we're looking at it when it's produced. We will count it in the year that it's made. So if somebody sells a used car, we wouldn't count it because it's already been counted in a previous year. There are a couple ways to calculate gross domestic product. We're only going to look at one of them, the expenditure approach. We're going to count consumer goods that are produced, two different types, durable, which means they last for a long time, CD players, cars, refrigerators, things like that, and non-durable, last a short time. Most obvious one is food. Business investments, what they're producing or what they're purchasing. And that's also including the inventory that they're holding. Government goods and services, and then net exports, which we will count up all of the things that we export, things that we produce and ship overseas, and then we'll subtract from that goods that are imported to the United States. This number is typically, well, it is negative. We import far more things than we actually export. And here's the formula when we start doing the math that we're actually going to use. C plus I plus G plus X minus M. So consumer spending plus business investment plus government spending, and then we're going to add our net exports, which is going to be exports minus imports. Two different ways to report GDP, nominal and real. Nominal is current prices. Real is adjusted for inflation. So if we are going to compare prices from one year to the next, we need to make sure that we're looking at real numbers. When they report gross domestic product, you get a primary report 2 months after a quarter, and then you get the final report 3 months later, which means if we're looking at first quarter, which would be January, February, March, we would not get the primary report until May, and then we wouldn't get the final report until June. And we have an example here. If in year one we sell 20 cars and trucks for $350,000, and in year two we sell the same exact cars and trucks, but we're able to sell them and report in gross domestic product 370. If you were just looking at the dollar amount, you may think that we were actually more productive, but in essence the only thing that's happened here is that we sold them for a higher price. So if we adjusted that 270, we'd have to adjust it to the same price as year one, 350. So gross domestic product would actually be the same for both years. We've got some limitations and exclusions of gross domestic product. Non-market activity is one of those things that is not counted. So if you're babysitting or you're mowing yards for someone else and they're paying you cash, obviously that's not reported to the government. But you cleaning your own room or washing your own car, those are things that if you paid someone else in a business to do, that would be counted. We have the underground economy, black markets, illegal sales, under-the-table wages aren't counted. Transfers and gift, which are gifts and taxes. If someone gives you a gift, we're not producing anything. And then taxes, where you take money from one group of people and give it to another. It's just transfer of wealth, and it's not production. Financial transactions, we don't include stocks and bonds in gross domestic product, and I've already said we don't include intermediate goods. And there are some things that are not necessarily good for our society, but actually contribute to GDP in a positive way. Natural disasters, not good for the country, but when everyone has to rebuild, it makes our economy grow. Divorce, you have families splitting up, but when you have someone having to purchase more stuff for another home, it actually increases gross domestic product. We have 4 business cycles, and all a business cycle is a period of macroeconomic expansion followed by a period of contraction. Expansion is where we're seeing economic growth, jobs are plentiful, unemployment tends to fall. Peak is at the highest point of that expansion. After a peak, obviously, we have to go back down. That's called a contraction, usually times of increased unemployment. And the bottom part of a contraction is called a trough, or the lowest part. And after we reach the lowest part, we only have up to go, so we see another period of expansion. And that's what this graph is showing. You have starting out with a peak, going through a contraction, reaching the bottom, the trough, and then going through another expansion recovery. We have several different terms to describe contractions depending on their characteristics and how severe they are. The first one is recession. That's where we have 6 months in a row or 2 quarters of no growth in the economy. And once we get that final report, that's 3 months after our 6 months. So it's really 9 months that before we actually know that we've been in a recession because of how it's reported. And a depression is just an especially long and severe depression, or excuse me, recession. And then you can have stagflation. Stagnant just means unmoving or decayed. And you have an unmoving or a declining economy with inflation, and those typically don't go hand in hand. A little comparison about depressions and recessions. An average recession lasts for 10.4 months, and we have had 11 since the Great Depression. The Great Depression itself lasted 43 months, and then the depression in 2008 only lasted for 16 months. And then unemployment during the Great Depression was 25%. Unemployment in 2008 actually only reached 10%.